cupboards and closets and maybe washing facilities, because what we do not want is for people to be hanging clothes on the windows and doors and verandas and such like. And so we have looked at all of this. And so at this stage, the committee has already drafted the first set of criteria, and we would be looking at that very, very, very soon, with a view of opening the application process by the 1st of September. During this process, you would be using the criteria, the set criteria for application, so you'd know exactly where one stand. The idea is to be able to have these units distributed by the end of November to the first week in January. Sorry, first week in December, sorry. So this is what we want to do. We want people to be able to move into those units before Christmas to be able to sort of acclimatize themselves in advance. So this is basically where we are with the housing units. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Minister Tillerson. I now move to my colleague, Minister Williams, who will give a brief update in relation to his new ministry, the Ministry of Mobilization, Implementation, and Transformation.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. Now, this new Ministry of Mobilization, Implementation, and Transformation has been recently added by the government with a mandate to lead the mobilization, implementation, and transformation of Grenada's policies agenda. MIT is therefore at the heart of the government transformative agenda. Therefore, the ministry seeks to ensure the delivery of government's mission-critical priorities. Integral to doing this is the ministry's mandate to reshape Grenada's mindset by inspiring and engaging the citizens in delivering the national transformative agenda. And more of this will follow as we launch the ministry in the upcoming weeks. The housing of the ministry will be at the ECCB building on the Kyanage, St. George's. The setup of the financial accounting system, inclusive of the vote, associated programs, and accounts for the ministry is done by the Ministry of Finance. So, therefore, just to give a little insight as to MIT, MIT will be the ministry that will ensure that things get done on a timely manner, or in a timely manner. In leading the transformation process of the government and Grenada on a whole, we may have several projects that will be implemented as we go along. What MIT will do is that, number one, the mobilization aspect of it. So certain ministries will have to come together to ensure that things are in place before a project can be started. MIT will lead the process. Also, we will monitor the implementation process of the project to ensure, or of projects to ensure that projects are implemented on time. And lastly, the transformation part of it, which is the most exciting part, is that there's something a disconnect between projects and our citizens. But MIT will be there to ensure that we educate the citizens on the ways that the project can transform this country, so that even the normal man on the street will know the reason why we are undertaking certain projects. So that is MIT in a nutshell, and we are in everyone's business to make sure that the government agenda is done in a timely manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Williams. My colleague, Minister Cornwall, will present a brief update in relation to the impact of the weather system that we had over the weekend, and how it has impacted the utility companies in particular and the customers of the utility companies. Minister Cornwall.
Good morning to all our listeners throughout Grenada, Carriacou, and PT Martinique, as well as persons listening to us via social media and out there in the diaspora. My role here today is basically to outline what the Ministry of Infrastructure, Physical Development, Public Utilities, Civil Aviation, and Transportation has done in recent time. And in particular, I will begin with the issue of the recently passed depression or bad weather system, which affected most of our utilities companies here in Grenada. As early as Sunday morning, I had briefings from Grenelec, which indicated that over 3,000 persons would have been affected by the weather through the fallen trees that may have affected power lines and blockages to the roads. We kept in touch throughout the weekend, and by Monday morning, I know the numbers had shifted from 3,000 plus to way under 1,000 persons, and they continue to work 24 hours to ensure that citizens were brought back online with their power. The same situation has happened with Nawasa. We've had some blockages of their lines, and although I don't have a final report from Nawasa, I believe that we are well on our way to make sure that those things are back on track. Throughout the country, there were fallen trees, broken branches and so on that littered the entire streets in some areas. We have worked arduously in ensuring that those roads are cleared. We also aware that there are some areas that we have not been able to at least remove some of the debris on the road, but we are working towards ensuring that we can bring back our road services and so on to optimum operations without much difficulties. I also wanted to talk a little bit on what is happening with regards to civil aviation. That's also fallen under my ministry. As we speak this morning, we'll have SVG Airlines coming to Grenada again after a long delay or stop. And so at the end of this press briefing, we'll expect SVG Airlines to be making its initial or inauguration flight to Grenada this morning. And I think while I might be here engaged at this press briefing, I've asked my PS to basically sit on the other end with me to make sure that we can be part and parcel of what is happening with regard to civil aviation. I also want to mention briefly about our intention to ensure that regional travel is been put back in place, because we recognize that LIAT, for example, who has been a provider of service throughout the OECS and the wider Caribbean, has been down for quite a while since COVID came into the picture. And we are looking at right now reviving that service throughout the OECS and the Caribbean. Albeit it may take a little while to get up and running, but we are confident that based on a recently held meeting with the other OECS leaders, that we can move forward to at least make sure that LIAT or in any other form comes back on stream and to provide service to our citizens of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique. I would end here at the moment.
Thank you, Minister Cornwall. This morning, I will provide a update on one issue, which is the steps we have taken to advance the payment of pensions to public officers affected by the ruling of the High Court. As you would recall, we had indicated that our proposal is to first address the retroactive aspect of the pension payment. I'm happy to report that the Ministry of Finance staff have been hard at work, and the Cabinet of Grenada has approved a timeline as well as the mechanism to be put in place to ensure that the pensions can be processed and paid in a timely manner. And so the Ministry of Finance staff have in fact established a one-stop pension secretariat. The office will be open next Wednesday after Carnival at the Kaipo building, and the Kaipo building is the Companies and Intellectual Property Office building. It is located on Lucas Street / Mount Welldale. So if one is traveling up Lucas Street and you take the left turn that takes you into Mount Welldale, which once housed the Governor General's residence and now currently houses the Parliament building, it is the first building on your left when you take that sharp corner. And so the Secretariat will be open next Wednesday, and the Secretariat will be in a position to begin processing applications by persons who are affected. And so we will use the months of August and September to do the processing. to ensure that all of the data is collected, to ensure that all of the administrative work, including receiving live certificates, notarization of any documents, a review process, and sign off by the audit department, the accountant general's department, occurs within that 2-month period. We intend to, if necessary, bring to Parliament supplementary appropriation bills to ensure that the financing is available to pay the retroactive aspect of this. Our timeline for doing this would be by the end of October. We therefore expect to be in a position that by 15th November 2022, all payments will be made, giving us an additional 2 weeks from the 15th to the 30th of November to address any mopping up issues that may have to be addressed. We had given the unions representing the workers affected by the decision until the end of July to come back to us with any comments or questions that they may have, because we had shared the fiscal impact assessment conducted by the Ministry of Finance with them. We did a follow-up reminder last week to inquire if they had any comments or questions. As of this morning, we have not received any. And so we take the silence as a sign that the unions are satisfied, if not happy, with what was shared to them. And so we now intend to move full steam ahead with that process. So we look forward to, all things being equal, us being in a position to wrap this process up by the 30th of November. So that's my update for this morning. And Prasek, we are happy to entertain any questions that the media may have.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister and honorable ministers, for these updates. We will now open to questions from the media. Just a reminder that we do need to end at 11 today, so we're recommended that you ask 2 questions at a time. One, allow the ministers to answer, and then another question. And of course, if we do have time, if it allows, we will come back around for another round of questions so that we can end at 11. So the floor is open. Kindly raise your hands on Zoom so that I can call on you if you do have a question for our ministers today. Okay, Nancy, I see your hand up first. You can go ahead, please.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody. I have a question for the Prime Minister on his meeting with the President of the Caribbean Development Bank and the whole urgency of digital transformation. I wonder if you could elaborate on that. And excuse me, number 2 for the Prime Minister is an update on the statutory body directors. As you said, these would be made public. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Nancy, for the questions. The meeting with the president of the Caribbean Development Bank went well. It was a high-level meeting. It was my first official meeting with him, and to a large extent, I think the meeting focused mostly on strategic policy initiatives for the government and how the bank may be able to assist in that regard. And so we did not get into what I would call technical details surrounding some of those initiatives. The bank's technical team is going to be here shortly, and when that happens, then we expect that there'd be more advanced talks in relation to that. I should perhaps just update, while not necessarily addressing the digitization issue or digitalization issue, the bank would have in fact chaired the meeting that was held yesterday by heads of OECS governments, as well as the president of Guyana and a representative from Barbados, in which we were looking at air transportation. And it was agreed that we would retain a consultant to provide advice to the heads of the region as to how we can address the critical need to have particularly air transportation resume at a level that existed prior to COVID-19. There are some outstanding issues between the bank and the government, such as our country engagement strategy that we need to sign off on. We are in the process of reviewing that, and we hope that we can do so shortly. We have appointed Minister Lennox Andrews to be our governor on the Caribbean Development Bank, and so he would be addressing most of the economic policy issues with the bank on our behalf. And so we expect the digitization particularly of the government services, to be part and parcel of what we would look at. But we did not engage in any significant substantive discussions on that issue. In relation to the appointment of boards, that process has started. In fact, we are having a special sitting of cabinet on Friday to address some of that. As you are aware, we have put out a call for expressions of interest from citizens who wish to serve on those boards. The response has been fantastic. I think to date we have as many as 1,600 applicants. And as you can imagine, having 1,600 applicants does require you to spend some time going through quite a bit of it. But I'm truly joyful at the fact that we've had such interest from Grenadians. We are doing our best to make sure that we can, in fact, have competent, qualified persons with a sufficient age range, experience, and gender balance, because that's critical for us. And so I expect once we get out of Carnival, that we would be able to announce the filling of many of these statutory bodies. We have begun to fill some of them. So, for example, the Citizenship by Investment Committee is fully constituted. The board for Grenlec is also fully constituted. And so we expect entities like the Planning Authority, Marketing and National Importing Board, NAWASA, etc., to be filled out in the coming week after Carnival. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We have another question now from Dr. Kellon Bubb from the Bubb Report.
Good morning, Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, and your team of ministers, and good morning to the new press secretary. I hope to have a very good working relationship with you, madam. All right, so the two questions I have, the first question has to do with the constitution of the newly constituted Grenlec board. Prime Minister, how do you respond to concerns that were raised regarding the notion that there are conflicts of interest with people that were appointed on the Grenlec board who previously had interests with WRB Enterprises? And there are questions also with respect to the idea that you've not really committed to ensuring that nepotism does not continue with some of the appointments on the board. So I want to get your thought process in that. And the second question I have has to do with LIAT. Given your commitment on a regional network to support the re-emergence of LIAT, if you will, are you concerned about the financial state of LIAT, especially the monies that LIAT owes to many of the workers that have been left stranded as a result of the downscaling of LIAT? And how are we as a government in Grenada going to finance what you propose as Grenada support where LIAT is concerned? So those are the only two questions I have.
All right, thank you. I'm not sure I'm following the first question. I'm not aware that we have appointed anyone to the Grenlec board who is affiliated with WRB. So perhaps you can be more specific or clarify. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. So we were referring to Andrea St. Bernard as one of the appointees on the Grenlec board.
Well, I'm pretty certain as it is that I'm alive today, that Ms. St. Bernard has never had any association, affiliation, or relationship of any kind with WRB. So I'm not sure what's the basis for that assertion. So if you have one, I'm happy to have it shared. But I can say categorically that Ms. St. Bernard has never had any association with WRB. Hi, Dr. Bubb.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. But the second part of the question was concerns with respect to nepotism. How do you address concerns that some members of the boards are party supporters?
Yeah, I think, well, I think, Kellon, that's part and parcel of a changing administration. Clearly, you're going to have some members of the board who are party supporters. In my view, that does not equate to nepotism. I think what we need to ensure is that persons who support the party or who don't support the party, as the case may be, persons who are competent and who understand their roles as a director and who understand the fiduciary duties that are placed upon them as directors. I could give you an example. I think if you read Ms. Saint Bernard's resume, you would see not only is she a lawyer, but that she's a highly qualified, successful business person. And I think if you look at the other members of the board, if you look at Mr. James Pitt, I think everybody knew who Mr. Pitt is. If you look at Mr. Rodney George, I think everybody knows Mr. George's background in energy, power plants, etc. If you look at Mr. Ben Brathwaite, he's a former chief financial officer of the company. So I'm just giving those as examples, so I'm not so sure where the nepotism arises. I'll move on to the second question. Now, LIAT 1974 is bankrupt. So that has been made clear, and it is in receivership. Where we are now is finding appropriate air travel for the OECS in particular. And whether it's LIAT, a new version of LIAT, or any other carrier, we are really interested in finding appropriate air travel for the OECS. It does not mean that appropriate, well, I can certainly say it will not be LIAT 1974, because obviously that entity is bankrupt, and no one is reviving that entity. As you may be aware, I think there's LIAT 2020, which currently operates out of Antigua, that has two planes in service. The question may be whether that service is extended, whether a new entity is created. There's also Inter-Caribbean Airline, whether there's a combination of both of that. Where we are is that we want to ensure that there's appropriate air service that services the Caribbean, and we are committed to helping in any way we can. Now, it may mean direct financial contribution, whether from an equity perspective, whether from a loan perspective. It may mean looking at the taxes and landing charges and fees that are charged at our airport. We are open to looking at all of the possibilities and coming up with the best solution in terms of our support. What I can say to you is that we are committed to playing our part in ensuring that regional travel returns for the benefit of Grenada. Our regional tourism market has almost disappeared because of the lack of air connectivity to Grenada. It is very difficult to travel from Grenada regionally, and it is very expensive to travel from Grenada to the international markets. I think our diaspora citizens have been complaining about the cost of flights from the eastern seaboard of North America to get to Grenada. Many of them have to stop in St. Lucia, for instance, and take British Airways down from St. Lucia to get to Grenada. And so as a government, we recognize the critical role that air travel plays in our economy, in our social life, and in our development. And therefore, we are committed to doing everything that we can to improve that situation.
Thank you, Prime Minister. A gentle reminder, colleagues, to please ask one question, allow the ministers to respond, and then ask your second question. We'll now go over to Rena Thomas from GBN News. Rena, the floor is yours.
Good morning to the board. My first question is surrounding, I hope you can hear me clearly. My first question is surrounding the weather system we had over the weekend. Now I'm seeking clarification on whether there was a failure in the instrument at the Met Office, or whether there was a failure in the part of the professionals. Where did the ball drop in getting the information out to the public on the approaching system? Now we're speaking about preparedness to the public, but are the professionals themselves prepared? Because the system didn't just come over the Point Saline Airport. And also we asking citizens to rely on the information coming from the reliable sources. And that reliable source would be NADMA. But NADMA didn't give any information out until after the system hit. So the people need some answers when it comes to that.
Thank you for the question. But first of all, let me say something about, I'm not a meteorologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's important that before we suggest that the ball was dropped, that in fact there's evidence that the ball was dropped. The professionals at the Met Office indicated that they were not in a position to in fact predict that there would be bad weather. And that's what predictions are. I mean, obviously they're not God. They could only use the scientific tools that are available, and they could only use their knowledge and experience. My instructions from the Met Office was that the weather pattern, that is the cloudiness, that created the system on Saturday into Sunday, in fact, is the same cloudiness that was over the island a couple of days before. And what we had was light rains and light showers. And so they had no indication that that would develop into and specifically create this strong storm gust that happened Saturday night into Sunday morning. That's the instructions I have. And in those circumstances, obviously, if they had thought otherwise, they obviously would have sent a warning to NADMA. NADMA in turn would have put it out to the public. So we have to appreciate that the professionals attempt to predict bad weather. They don't always get it right because it's predictions. They don't have 2020 foresight. They do have 2020 post the event. And so in the case of NADMA, NADMA could only have addressed the situation after it became known to it. So there was no indication from the Met Office that the system was likely to develop into the strong gusty winds that developed. But that is what happened. I mean, that's the nature of the weather at times. So I don't think, frankly, the question is a fair one that suggests that the instruments were not working or that suggests that the professionals were not doing their jobs.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Rina, do you have a second question for the panel?
Answer. My second question goes to the Ministry of Social Development. You spoke about the reopening of application. I'm asking, does this mean that the persons who would have applied previously had to reapply again?
Thank you, Rina. What we are seeking to do is to provide an opportunity for as many people as possible who are interested in these units to make an application. And those who have applied before, the 4,000 or so who have applied before, there is no need to reapply. They remain on file and they will be included in the vetting process before the housing units are actually distributed. So there is no need to reapply.
Thank you, Minister. We now move on to Linda Straker. Linda, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone. My first question is to the Prime Minister. According to Section 58, subsection 3 of the Constitution, it says, there shall be, in addition to the office of Prime Minister, other such offices of minister as may be established by Parliament are subject to the provision of any law enacted by Parliament by the Governor General acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister. Can you tell us, based on that background, whether or not the Ministry for Mobilization, the MIT Ministry, is a ministry standing on its own, or if it's a division of the Ministry of Finance? Because I just heard the minister for that ministry said that his vote is under the Ministry of Finance. So can you explain that to us, please? Is it a standalone ministry with its own financing? And if it has its own financing, that was not provided for in the budget currently in operation. Can you tell us where it is getting the appropriation from? Or is it a division of the Ministry of Finance operating on the finance appropriation?
All right, thank you for the question, Linda. To clarify, the report provided by the Minister for MIT was indicating that the Ministry of Finance is working on the vote, as well as the administrative processes to establish the ministry. We intend to go to Parliament to get the appropriate supplementary appropriation passed to support the work of the Ministry of Mobilization, Implementation and Transformation. And so to specifically answer your question, it is a standalone ministry. It is not a ministry operating under the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Linda. Do you have a second question for the panel?
Yes, my second question has to do with, for Minister Cornwall. Can he tell us whether or not Grenada renewed its parametric insurance coverage with the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility for the policy year 2022 to 2023.
If I may say that that information, I do not currently have it at hand, but I can assure you that I will do the follow-up and be able to provide you with that information at a subsequent meeting.
I can actually answer the question, Minister. The answer is yes. Grenada is currently part of that process. And in fact, we are expecting a visit from Mr. Isaac Anthony in the coming weeks to further hold discussions on the catastrophic risk insurance. And specifically, we are looking to explore GRENLEC taking up insurance in relation to that. The public may or may not be aware that currently GRENLEC is self-insured because private insurers traditionally have not been prepared to cover the transmission and distribution aspect of GRENLEC's operations, which are the poles and lines, which are obviously absolutely essential to ensuring that electricity is delivered to consumers. And as a result, since 1994, GRENLEC has had to put aside approximately $2 million each year to fund what is called the Hurricane Fund. And that is the fund that GRENLEC used after Hurricane Ivan in 2004 to be able to rebuild the transmission and distribution system. GRENLEC has not been part of the catastrophic risk insurance. Now that that insurance is available and specifically is available to cover transmission and distribution lines, we obviously want to explore that possibility. Our colleague company in St. Lucia is part of that, and so that is something we are looking to explore as well. In fact, just before coming to this press briefing, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance and I was discussing this very issue, and he raised the point that Grenada, unfortunately, has never benefited from being paid out under the catastrophic risk insurance. And I indicated to him, well, now that we've had the bad weather, we have to look at whether or not we qualify or not. But we are part of the process, and we've been part of that scheme for quite a while.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We have a question from Callistra Farie. Callistra, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. It's Farrier, not Farie, and welcome aboard, Press Secretary. Good morning, ministers. Prime Minister, I have a single question. Ms. Daisy Joseph Andel has been appointed as a member of the CBI board. Her resume is excellent. She is very, very qualified. But the thing is that Ms. Joseph and Mrs. Joseph Andel has, in an interview with me, confirmed that she still remains with the True Blue, which is the True Blue outfit, which is the passport, the CBI agent affiliated with the Kimpton Kawana Bay project. And she is also part of the arbitration process that is now before the International Court involving Grenada and the principles of Kimpton Kawana. She is also so she's admitted that and said that she believes that some wrongs have to be righted. But she sits on a board, so she's on both sides. She's part of the arbitration, and she sits on a board, a state board that is in contention with her employers, if you will. Any concerns about a conflict of interest, Prime Minister? And were you aware that Mrs. Joseph Andel was still a part of Kimpton and True Blue when you appointed her?
Yes, I was aware, and she made full disclosure of that fact to me prior to me considering her appointment. So I was aware of that fact. In a small place like Grenada, conflicts of interest are always going to arise. The critical thing is that we manage the conflict of interest. I'm satisfied that should an actual conflict of interest arise, that we are well placed to manage that. Kawana Bay, while an approved project, is obviously not operating. No applications are being processed on its behalf because of the fact that obviously we have inherited a dispute between Grenada and Kawana Bay. The dispute is between Grenada, the state of Grenada, and Kawana Bay, which is the branded name of the hotel, but the actual company is True Blue Bay. I think, Development Limited. The CBI committee's main role is to oversee the citizenship by investment program, and specifically to treat with applications by individual persons who are applying for Grenadian citizenship. There are no persons applying through True Blue Bay Development Limited, aka Kawana Bay. And so I'm satisfied that we are in a position to, I'm satisfied that Ms. Daisy Joseph Handel is in a position to adequately carry out her functions on the committee. But as I said, should there be a risk of any conflict of interest, that is something we can manage. And I mean, it's a simple way to manage it. Obviously, should anything in any way, shape, or manner arise in relation to True Blue Bay Development Limited, aka Kawana Bay, she would obviously have to recuse herself.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Callistra, do you have a second question for the panel?
My second question, Prime Minister. Mrs. Joseph Handel spoke of rights that have wrongs that have to be righted in the context of, she was speaking of the situation between the state of Grenada and her professional, well, the Kimpton and True Blue Bay development. Did in your conversations with Mrs. Handel before the appointment, did she indicate that she was thinking along those lines?
Well, I haven't seen your interview with us, so until I see your interview, it's difficult for me to comment. And second, no, we have had no such conversation.
So there is no concern that she may be able to use her position representing that state body for her clients or her employers or whatever the state description is with Kimpton and True Blue.
No, I think my original comments remain. As I said, I think I kind of gave an oversight as to what the CBI committee does. And that is the extent to which she serves as a director of that committee. I'm satisfied that, let me first say this, the matter between True Blue Bay and Grenada is in arbitration. If that is a process by which this matter is resolved, then it's arbitrators who are going to make the decision. That's the first thing. I am prepared to indicate, however, that the government of Grenada is prepared to consider alternatives to resolving this matter other than via arbitration. Because at the end of the day, what the people of Grenada have been left with by the prior administration is a white elephant standing at perhaps one of the most spectacular locations in Grenada with no end in sight to the hotel being completed and becoming operational. And as leader of this state, we must find a way to complete this hotel, have it operational and functioning so that it does not remain an eyesore on the southern tip of Grand Anse Beach. That hotel was in fact being built by a local company, mainly, that had over 200 workers working there. They were sent home. The site was closed. And I'm yet to date to be provided with any explanation by the former administration as to why the hotel had to be closed, why the workers had to be sent home, and why the state of Grenada has to be facing a $200 million arbitration at ICSID. Those are the matters that occupy my mind, and those are the matters that we have to address. And so from where I sit, I am prepared to explore all opportunities to have a sensible and fair resolution of this matter so that we can get the hotel completed, we can get the hotel operational, and we can add more room stock to our tourism plant so that we can encourage the continued development of tourism in Grenada.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you for your questions, Callistra. We're now moving on. MTV News, the floor is yours. MTV News, are you able to hear us?
Pleasant morning to the Prime Minister and the honorable ministers. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I have two questions. My first question is for Minister Cornwall regarding the transportation study that was done some time ago. I think it was done under the previous administration to improve the public transportation system. Do you have an update on this transportation study or where it is at this point in time?
Good morning again. I would have gone through a number of reports. I would not sit here and tell you I have read that transportation study that was done, but I can assure you in due course, we will be looking at all such reports to ensure whatever decisions that was taken by the prior administration regarding transportation will be looked into and to ensure that the best service is provided to our population here in Grenada.
Thank you, Minister. MTV, do you have a second question for the panel?
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. I do have a second question. I'm not certain if it would be Minister Williams or the Honorable Prime Minister who would be able to respond to this one. There's something happening in Randitang, construction-wise. Is anybody able to give us an update on what is it that is being built there?
Sorry, Donella, I think your question has stumped all of us. When you say something is happening in Granite construction-wise, I honestly don't know specifically what you are referring to. I think most of my colleagues are indicating that they're not aware. I do recall driving, I guess what we call over the hills, and somewhere in Granite on the side of the road, I saw something being erected. I don't know if that's what it is, but I too will confess ignorance, as in not knowing what it is about. So that's the most we can say.
Okay, thank you. That is what I was speaking about.
Okay, well, I think Minister of Cornwall perhaps we make some inquiries so we can find out whether this is a public or private adventure. And if it is something to do with the public, then obviously we will come back to you and report on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move on to Nisha Paul. Nisha, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everyone at the head table and to my media colleagues and the listening public. My first question has to do with what is referred to as the docked salaries that was paid out to public servants. While there is no legal obligation for an employer to pay workers strike pay as compared to other examples set out in law, such as the maternity leave, sick leave, annual vacation leave, etc. Is the government considering to bring to push legislation in to effect that? In light of the fact that there is no legal obligation, and to ensure that the move to pay the dock salaries as part of the government's drive to enhance the industrial relations in Grenada, will there be any sort of education drive to ensure that workers understand that they are not entitled to be paid by an employer whenever they conduct a strike? That is my first question.
All right, thank you for the question. Yes, there's no legal obligation to, well, the fundamental relationship between employer and employee is work for pay. And there's a fundamental understanding that an employer as well can't force an employee to work. I think we know the history of our islands. And so if an employee chooses not to work, that's the employee's right. But if the employee chooses not to work, it's also the employer's right not to pay. So in our context, generally if an employee strikes or takes industrial action, there's nothing the employer can do about that. And in fact, the law protects the employee's right to industrial action, including the right to strike. But the law does not mandate that in those circumstances, the employer has to pay the worker. In our case, we chose to extend the olive branch and to pay or repay the dock salaries because the circumstances surrounding the industrial action, I think, ought to be taken into context. This was a situation in which, in fact, the government had agreed to pay salary increases to the public workers and the teachers. There was no dispute about that. The government chose not to pay it. And we were satisfied that it was not a question of inability to pay, but it was a question of, frankly, a power play of saying, I will pay you when I choose to pay you. And in those circumstances, we do not think that any employer, including the government, is justified in acting in that manner. And if you are wrong, there's nothing wrong. In fact, there's everything right with saying you are wrong, that you apologize and that you move on. And the fact that this was done by our predecessor in office made no difference as far as we were concerned. The buck stops with us. We're in a position to do something about it, and we have chosen to do something about it. The point is, if you want industrial peace, one hand can't clap. It requires both sides to act reasonably. And so part of this was to send the message to our unions and our employees, particularly government employees, that we are prepared to be reasonable. We are prepared to extend the olive branch, and so in return, we expect also that they would be reasonable and productive. And when it comes to settling differences between us, that we will take a reasonable and constructive approach or methodology to doing so. And on the education point, I think we are committed to educating ourselves and educating members of the public, educating our employees or employers about our rights or responsibilities and our collective responsibility to build Grenada. So in a sense, I think your question is hinting at a suggestion that we should do some education, and certainly that is something we're prepared to take back, consider, and with the help of GIS, or PRESSEC, the Ministry of Labor, the Trade Unions Council, we are certainly happy to embark upon an education drive to educate all who are impacted by our labor laws, to know the laws and to know our do's and don'ts. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Nisha, your second question?
Okay, just for clarity on the first question, so no move to push legislation in that regard, Mr. Prime Minister?
No move. And I'll be honest, it's not something I've considered, and hence the answer of no move. But I would also say at first blush, I'm sure employers would probably find it a difficult concept to grapple. If you could not work and be paid, then it will basically put an employer in a position where an employee could essentially not do anything and be paid. And I can't sit here and say that's fair. I mean, as I said, one hand can't clap. Your right to industrial action is protected already in law. And I mean, obviously, if there's a dispute, if there's a grievance, you certainly have the right to, in a sense, flex your muscle to try and get the employer to agree to the terms and conditions that you want. But at the same time, you can't flex your muscle and then still be paid, because basically it would mean you could just not show up to work and be paid. And I think the fundamental relationship between pay and work is you have to work to be paid. So I certainly have to say I think that would be a difficult concept to push, and perhaps would even be unfair.
Thank you. Nisha, did you have a second question?
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. My second question is for Minister Williams as it relates to the MIT ministry. Can you speak to when the ministry would move into or start operating from the ECCB building, and where is it operating from at present? Thank you very much.
Thank you. At present, we are operating in the complex. We are getting the department together in terms of staffing and so. We are looking to move into the ECC building in the next 2 weeks, right? And that's where we will have a jumpstart team that will get the ministry moving, right? But that doesn't stop us from getting things done. We are well into looking at projects and so that have a slow implementation rate, and we are working towards speeding up the process in order to get them going and to get them completed on time. Because as you know, sometimes we may lose grants and so because we have not implemented the projects in a timely manner. So yes, we are putting the department together, but we are also working on getting these things done ASAP. And I want to get things done, and the Prime Minister gave me a mandate, so I'm not taking it lightly.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions this morning. Unfortunately, we are out of time for this morning, so I'm going to give our ministers a chance to leave us with some closing remarks. Minister, if you would like to start.
Thank you, Press Secretary. All right, well, I just want to say to the Grenadian public and to the applicants, we are moving with haste and with caution also to ensure that the housing units are going to be distributed by December, with one caveat that we may wish to consider some measure of retrofitting, and if that happens, it means that the process can slow down a bit. So please be patient with us. What we're trying to do is to ensure that the transformation agenda is properly implemented and that people's lives, the quality of life for people, are generally taken into consideration in distributing these units. So thank you for your patience as we continue to work in your best interest.
Thank you, Minister Telesford. Minister Telesford. Minister Williams, any closing remarks?
Just want to let the public know that I'll be working along with Mr. Telesford to ensure that these units are ready on time, right? So rest assured I'll be behind him and Mr. Cornwall too. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Cornwall.
I just want to close by saying that those who were affected by the recently passed weather system, we know that we still are awaiting final reports on the areas that are affected. But rest assured that we will be in every village, every town, to ensure that we do the cleanup once and for all, and also to ensure our citizens out there that we are continuing to work with you. So wherever there is some impact and we are not yet aware of it, we'll get there. We can give it that assurance. And we hope that at the end of the day, you will notice that this is a government that is ready and willing to basically assist wherever possible and to make sure that we respond in a timely manner. There are one or two people out there who still ask that we come out and visit the area. Like one instance is one in Fort Judy. And I am saying it because I do not want the gentleman who basically approached me to think that we are not going to get there. We are going to get there sooner than later. Thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister, over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, I want to first wish our citizens, since this is the beginning of Carnival Week, an enjoyable and safe Carnival. It's our first Carnival coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic is still hanging around. We also have the threat and the risk of the monkeypox virus. And obviously, we have citizens and visitors coming in via air and sea travel. We need to be mindful of that. So it's just a reminder for us to be safe while enjoying Carnival. We certainly want an incident-free Carnival as well. And so we certainly would ask particularly our young people to remember that Carnival is about fun, not about violence. And so leave the knives, cutlasses, and any other tool at home. Come out and have a clean, safe, and enjoyable Carnival. We want you around after Carnival Wednesday. We want to assure the public that we will do everything to support the Spice Mass Corporation. I think at our last press briefing, we indicated that financial appropriation was being made to the Spice Mass Corporation. We certainly intend to, after this Carnival, have a full review of our Carnival and, frankly, all of our festivities to make sure that we can have a coordinated and national input into them to make them better for all stakeholders, because we see our festivities as part of our culture, but also critical towards marketing Grenada's tourism. And we want to make sure that that's a central theme that runs through this. So have an enjoyable Juve morning and an enjoyable Carnival Monday and Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. To all our viewers this morning, thank you for joining us for this morning's post-cabinet press briefing. Thank you for your engagement, and we look forward to seeing you at the next press briefing.